And welcome to another module in the training units that there are for care coordinators and other professionals through the Division for Senior and Disability Services. I'm Ann Applegate, and I'm a consultant for the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education. I want to thank DHSS and DSDS, particularly Kara Livingston Thrasher, for helping produce this material and also for giving me the opportunity to talk with you about supported decision making and how professionals can help make this particular tool more accessible for the people who want it. We're going to talk for about an hour today. I am going to talk for about an hour today, and then we're going to have an opportunity for a live streaming question and answer session in December. The idea being that you would be able to get some direct instruction, think about some of your questions, and bring those questions to be answered live by me. And hopefully we can move this forward as something that people can use to take over more decisions in their lives, or to have something that puts in writing the ways that they already have and use support for decision making. So we're going to get started. I have talked to a lot of professionals about this particular tool. We have been working on it since 2018, and we at the Govs Council have presented to I think over 2,000 audience members in that time. Probably some repeats, so that may well include some of you here today. So I'm going to kind of do a quick little overview before we get started on the topic, to think about who is going to be using this particular training. Care coordinators would hopefully get some stuff out of it, and court visitors, program staff for the Centers for Independent Living, resource center staff like the ADRCs and the DDRCs. Special education staff could use this as well for those transition plans in IEP meetings at schools. We've also had some hospital discharge planners really be interested in this as a tool, maybe not for kind of urgent, acute questions that they have to deal with, but with discharge planning and future advanced planning. So those are kind of the people that we've talked to before, and what I'd like to sort of focus on in this training. The obvious question for you to think about is, what do you already know? If you've heard about SDMAs, which is kind of the acronym that we use, if you've been to a training before, probably with me, or maybe one that was available online, there have been some national trainings that have been made available. And if perhaps you've had an opportunity to help someone write an SDMA, or have been a supporter for someone who has any kind of tool for decision making. Well, and then obvious question is for you to think about what you want to know. And from my perspective, I have my own agenda, which is what I want you to know. And what I would like you to know are basically the three W, H, and H question. What are they? Why does it matter? And how can we help? It used to be who, what, why, but so what we're talking about today is really going to be a couple of things besides the why and the what and the how. We're also going to talk about ideas about supported decision making in general, and what that looks like, kind of broadly speaking. And we're going to talk about some tools specifically that can be used, the written guide and the website particularly, and also thinking about people. Who are the people that are available for you to go to if you have questions, or you are interested in getting started and you've done all your homework and you just want to check and make sure that you are on the right track? So, first question, what is a supported decision making agreement? Um, Important ideas first about support for decision making is that people can make their own decisions. Everybody can. What they make decisions about may be different, and certainly the way that they make decisions will be different. But everyone also has a will and goals and things that they desire, things they want to have happen in their lives, objects that they want to have around them, people that they want or don't want near them. And everyone's goals are important to them, even if they might not seem big to other people. And people can say or communicate what they want. And most people who are professionals in this field know that communication can take different forms. And it's important to remember that that's what we're talking about when we say they can communicate what they want. Those people are understood by people who know them well and who they trust. And those are the big important ideas that underlie the concept of support for decision making. Um, Generally speaking, when we talk about support, we're talking about relationships or practices, arrangements or agreements that are more or less formal or intense. Some of them are official, like a guardianship or a conservatorship, and some of them are much more um, kind of familiar. They're about kind of a habit of communication between people that is understood. I know that I'm going to ask my son about my computer, and he's aware that I'm going to call him at any time and say, I'm not understanding how I'm supposed to load up this software or something like that. That's an example of kind of just an understanding, a relationship, and a unspoken agreement. But there are others that are more intense and more formal. But they're meant to assist a person to make decisions or to communicate decisions to others about that person's life. And we all do this varying degrees in varying areas of our lives. Everyone makes decisions using information or help or communication help from other people. So in Alaska, I have to move my little Zoom thing out of the way here. In Alaska, we have supported decision making agreements, and it's a law. It's in the law, and it's called the SDMA Act. There's an example form that is in the law. Um, it lists the team members for supporting someone's decision making and also the kinds of roles that they might have. It allows people to describe how they want people to help them make decisions specifically in what areas of their life and how much help and what kind of help they want. Um, when I say areas of life, that's kind of describing the kinds of decisions that someone might want help with, whether it's about employment or where they live, or even friendships and dating and sex, and areas like education and training, services. All those kinds of things can all be listed in the form. There are open lines that you can fill in and boxes to check about what you do and do not want in that agreement. There's also a place to ask whether or not there are authorizations for release of information that are going to be needed and included. And then there's an instruction to attach them to the form. There's also a place to write about what other things, orders, or documents might be helpful for implementing the decision-making agreement. And it reminds people to attach them if they need to be there. Um, and gosh, now I'm going to move this thing again. Hold on, sorry. If there is a guardian or a conservator, the document has a place for their signed consent that they understand the agreement, that they support it's being used, and they agree. And then that signature has to be notarized by someone who, right, a notary is an official who has certification from the government to verify identity and also to watch someone sign a document. So that's a very formal step. Now, using an SDMA, which is what I'm going to call it while I'm doing this, um, is something that will be different for everyone who has one, because the nature of relationships and arrangements and lives are all individual. But the one thing is that it will be about a support from a circle of trusted people. The agreement will put how that's going to work into writing. And specifically, it'll be about supporters who are responsible, who agree to get information for someone. Maybe they're checking in on goals, long-term goals, or maybe short-term, chunked up objectives within a longer goal. They perhaps could be reviewing documents for someone or reminding them to make an appointment or get an appointment or show up for an appointment. It could be about explaining processes. I've been helping somebody that I support right now with getting an ABLE account, and the way that that relationship unfolds is reflective of our relationship together and the kinds of things that I agreed to do to help with the ABLE account. Or communicating with other people. The example I always use for this is my mother, before she died, had a stroke. This was several years before she passed, and her stroke didn't impact her ability to drive, but it did give her some difficulty with sequencing in speech. And she had to go to the California DMV investigator's office. They have a special office after somebody has had a stroke, and to demonstrate that she could, the last step to getting her license reinstated. But they told her that she couldn't have anybody else in the room with her unless it was an interpreter. And I wasn't an interpreter. I would have just put my hand on her knee and said, "Slow down, Mom." And she was so uncomfortable about the prospect of not having myself or my brother, somebody in there with her just to keep her calm, that she decided not to get her license reinstated. And the last 5 years of her life, she didn't drive, even though she could have. And it changed the way her life functioned and her enjoyment, picking up her grandkids after school for my sister. None of that happened for her in those 5 years. And that is part of what a supported decision-making agreement in Alaska would prevent. Um, Telling supporters, using an SDMA, of course, includes telling supporters what you need or what someone needs if they have an SDMA. And that's often a learned skill, and it may take some practice. It is another way that the SDMA helps, because it is already written, and the expectation is that this direction of supporters is going to happen. So there's one less sort of hurdle to get over for having a more active role in communicating what you need and want from a supporter. It's already written down. Everybody understands that it's part of what's going to happen. supporting someone is also a learned skill, especially if there's been a history of a relationship as a parent of a minor child. And then to have your son or daughter be an adult and have that relationship shift to an adult communication, as opposed to the patterns of all the years of being someone's little kid. And that can be a learned skill that is assisted by having things in writing. It can you end up writing out a routine, and then that routine or pattern of communication grows to reflect the desired structure as it's written in that SDMA. It provides clear roles and recognizes that as a supporter, the role is not to convince someone of the thing that the supporter thinks should be done, but really giving kind of the pros and cons, helping point out other things that somebody hasn't thought of, providing different sources of information, maybe even outside information. And really, the basis is respecting shared and unshared values, both. Now, to continue with SDMAs in Alaska, you can see here on the slide, there's just a kind of a snapshot of the front page of the actual statutory form. This is what it looks like in the statute. And no one would expect a non-legal professional to be able to jump right to the statutory form. But I put this up here so that you can see how um, the information about supporter number one there on the bottom of that little box set in blue has got their name, their address, their telephone number, and their email. And then there's a little set of check boxes, and it goes on to the page, the second page, which I don't have here. But it says, I want this supporter to help me with, and then in parentheses, it says, mark any of the following you want. And what this is to show you is that each supporter can be designated for different types of decisions, or someone could check all of the boxes. And then after that, there's another space to write other. There's also a space to say, what do I not, is there something you do not want this supporter to help you with? And you can check those boxes too. So anyone can have one. I keep referring to you, even though I'm talking to professionals, because you could have one. It's unique in Alaska. It's one of the things that is singled out nationally as being best practices now, because it's a universal design, and there's no reason to separate out people who have a diagnosis or have a disability that impacts their decision making. All of us need help with decisions, and all of us can use this if we want to. Again, it's not limited to people with a diagnosis or a disability. When we were writing this law, I really wanted to make sure that that wouldn't be part of the proof that would be necessary to have it be honored by a third party. So if you went into a business, or in my example, to the DMV, I didn't want it to my mother in that circumstance to have to prove, to demonstrate that in order to use support from a supporter in that room, that she was someone who had a diagnosis. So we don't have that in Alaska. It can also, therefore, be used for advanced planning for older adults. Because you don't have to have a diagnosis or a disability to use one, it can be part of the way that an older adult plans for the aging process. People can also be under our order for guardianship, which is another unique thing about Alaska and our SDMA Act. In other states, it requires that somebody not have a guardian in order to take advantage of having a supported decision-making agreement. We wanted to make sure in Alaska that we had a tool that could include a guardianship order as part of the tools, and maybe necessary as a backstop, or also a structure in which the capacities of everybody involved could kind of grow through the supported decision making agreement, and then perhaps outgrow the guardianship order and maybe end up with a lesser kind of less restrictive tool like conservatorship or powers of attorney. And so we don't, so long as the guardian or the conservator agrees and signs their consent, ideally they would be part of the team, is how we would envision it be to work well for someone, I think. Now, the editable version of the long form of the agreement that you see here is online. Keep in mind that not everybody's life is going to be that complicated. It may be that someone has chosen to have a supported decision-making agreement, but they really only have one or two supporters. They just want to have the agreement to make sure everybody understands how that support is going to go and in what areas. So the long form may not be necessary. The law only requires that it be substantially similar. If you use a different form, a more simple form, that's possible too. The substantially similar part will be met if the declarations are the same, and you'll see those in the form, and the making sure that any supporter that's named, there is all of the information about them there, and that it says clearly what kinds of areas the person would want support, and probably the notary signing of or observing of the signatures of supporters and any guardian or conservator. So it doesn't have to be this big form. Lots of lives are going to be simpler than that. Um, as I mentioned, and you're kind of hearing, these documents have legal effects, and the statute describes what those effects are. That's why the last part of this, as you'll see in the slides ahead, really needs to be done by a legal services provider, because there is there are legal impacts that should be explained, and lawyers are good at doing that, and also non-lawyer advocates. So we've talked a little bit about what they are, and for a lot of you that's going to be review, and some of you maybe it's not enough information. And for those of you in that latter group, I really want to invite you to go back to two different sources. There is a YouTube video from 2018 that Kara and I did together for care coordinators and other service planner coordinating people. And it's available. You can Google Alaska supported decision making agreements YouTube, and it will pop up. It's long, it's 3 hours. So if you want to just listen to the first hour, that's all the background that you might have missed here. The other thing to do is to go to the Governor's Council, and that link will be on a slide in the end here. And there is a website or a web page there on the Governor's Council website that's all about supported decision making, and especially in Alaska. So that's the resource if that first what are they information that I just gave isn't enough for you. But why does this matter? Why do we need another tool, and why this tool? First of all, I'm a lawyer, so I want to say equality and accommodation for access. We talk about equal access under the law, equal rights under the law, and the ADA is all about reasonable accommodation to access institutions and processes and policies. But creating an accommodation, a reasonable accommodation that allows people to have greater authority over their lives is just as important, or maybe even more important. We all use supported decision making, and no one makes decisions completely on our own. So why do we create a hierarchy of valid access? You know, it's okay for me to need to talk to a financial advisor about retirement benefits and pension from the state, and when do I start accessing that stuff to maximize my financial well-being over a period of 30 years or whatever. That's considered a valid accommodation for decision making. um, and yet having someone come with you to a doctor's office and help you decide whether or not you need surgery because you don't sequence the information about consequences and medication use, and because you're not going to think of the questions that are most relevant in that moment and in that environment, that is somehow less uh, about an ordinary life, and it's more about uh, somebody not making their own decisions somehow. And that's just not, I think, fair, and certainly not an equality of access to information. People need information in different ways at different times, and that's what we're talking about. Providing individualized accommodations for decision making reflects our community values, our public policies, and the law. First of all, we always talk about maximizing individual potential, and this clearly does that. It's about including people in not just in our communities and interacting with different types of institutions more effectively. It's also just including them in the decision making about the things that matter to them. It's about equality of rights because, again, as I said, if somebody needs more or different kind of help, it doesn't invalidate the actual decision that's being made. For older adults, every right for every day that it should be retained. That's what we've heard over and over again, talking to older adults who are experiencing some discrimination about their ability to make decisions for themselves. And ultimately, it's that guardianship isn't the right tool often. That's usually the alternative that's talked about, but it's really about a continuum. So that there are tools that are needed for various kinds of circumstances, various times of life, various kinds of decision making. And having more than one tool is that gold standard of having things individualized and having them appropriate, not just as for seeing someone as a kind of an undeveloping, uh, non-moving, non-changing kind of set of circumstances, but recognizing that people's lives are fluid and that people are fluid. So when we talk about guardianship, I'm sure most of you already know, but I want to make sure that it's clear that the law says that a full guardian of an incapacitated person, this is the language from the law, has the same powers and duties respecting the ward that a parent has respecting an unemancipated minor, except these things here. And, these things: least restrictive abode, abortion, sterilization, removal of organs, terminating parental rights, prohibiting marriage. Those are just things that a full guardian would have to go back to a court and justify with proof. And there are examples of guardians going back to court and getting these particular powers and duties. So it's pretty extreme. And that isn't a best fit for lots of people, and it's also not the best fit for many people in particular times and particular decisions in their life. And that's why we need other tools. And that's why this tool. Last one, I think civil rights, equality, and personhood. This is what people describe, that losing legal authority to decide as an adult makes people feel small. It makes them feel as though they are less than it. As one person described it as a civil death. And older adults feel a loss of their identity as an actor or a mover in their own lives. Losing civil rights make people feel that they're not equal. And losing the dignity of risk, the opportunity to fail, is an important part or important thing to avoid in developing your character. It turns out that people learn from experiences, and their learning changes who they are. It gives them stories that they can tell other people and interact with those people about shared experiences, or allows them to give advice based on their own experience. Um, it, who we are is formed a lot by the ways in which we have failed and how we responded to that failure. And so having risks and having the opportunity to not do something well grows our own individual selves. And that personhood can get drowned by in an overly restrictive decision-making arrangement or order. Now, older adults are unique in some respects with regard to supported decision making. First of all, there are 1.3 million adults in full guardianship in the country, and 85% of them are over 65. Um, Often they enter court supervision because of acute circumstances, hospitalization, financial abuse. Um, Maybe there are urgent medical decisions that have to get made, or discharge planning, or creating some alternate kinds of supports for handling finances. And there are people involved, or a surrogate decision maker, or a hospital social worker, or even adult protective services if there's abuse or neglect. And sometimes it'll start as a temporary guardianship, but the calendar for having it reviewed in when the acute circumstances have passed uh, gets lost or gets ignored. The notices don't happen, and oftentimes it just continues. So there's a guardianship order that starts out with sort of people thinking it's going to be temporary, and then it isn't temporary. Um, Exploitation by a bad actor is another one of those acute circumstances that I was talking about. And in that circumstance, subsequent to the acute condition, when it being resolved, then supported decision-making agreements can be part of the advanced planning for the next phase of life. But they also are useful to, I think, prevent some of the acute circumstances. If there is a structure for support for decision making, then there tends to be more eyes on, and there's a little bit of a stronger net for an older adult. That's what we are seeing mostly in New York City, where SDMAs started as a tool for older adults and has been used there in a couple of, in conjunction with a couple of their older adult service grants. So what people say they want. This, I think, is an important thing. We ask people what they want, and we try to do person-centered planning. And what people say they want is independence. They want support that is the right fit for them, but they want to have authority over their lives. They want to have choices about what they do every day. And every day matters is the thing that older adults are constantly reiterating. It doesn't matter if 3 months from now, the conservatorship is going to have to be a guardianship. I don't want a guardianship for the 3 months intervening. For as many days as possible, even through the aging process. That's another quote that someone gave me when I was interviewing older adults. Older adults also want flexibility to support to match their changing needs, not just over time, but differences day to day. And that's where a supported decision making can be very useful as well, because it can be written to be more flexible. They want to plan and take and retain responsibility for their future. There are some videos that I have linked in a further slide that are from various service providers around the country who have done first-person interviews with people who have supported decision-making agreements. And they describe the ways that they have increased their engagement and also their courage to take responsibility for their own future. Of course, people always say they want their civil rights. People who have their rights impinged upon and who are exposed to regular discrimination. They are keenly aware of when their civil rights are being denied. They also want protection from exploitation, abuse, and neglect. And older adults particularly say they want to feel needed, safe, and secure. What's interesting about supported decision-making agreements, and it's just all of the data is early because we've only been doing it for 5 years, but the current data is showing that when they are used and working for people actively in their lives, they create more eyes on, and there is increased stability in people's lives when they have a supported decision-making agreement that they are using. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, especially with the data on employment. So, meaningful choices and well-being. Those are the two things that you hear over and over again in the self-reports from people with supported decision-making agreements. And they talk about connectedness to their community. One person says in one of these videos below that they are a social justice advocate and activist, and their supported decision-making agreement reflects their values about social justice and also helps them work for social justice for others. So the better employment outcomes, that's the data that we have that's the best because it was done apples to apples. People who experience the same kind of impacts in their lives from disability were compared to see whether the people who had guardianship orders or had supported decision-making agreements, what their lives looked like in comparison to each other. And it was in the same location. And the thing that jumped out for everybody was that the employment outcomes were better for the people who had supported decision-making agreements. I do know one example of that doesn't make data, it's just becomes an anecdote in Alaska. But that story as it unfolded, and I can tell you later, maybe in the question and answer segment, it intuitively makes sense when you hear how it unfolded, that the SDMA was something that was pivotal for steering the employment outcome in a direction that was favorable for the young person who had the SDMA and kept him in a place where he really wanted to be. Greater satisfaction with life because their choices are real. That's a quote from one of these videos too, that they have real choices. We all feel that way. Again, we've talked about learning from your own failures, but it's also an opportunity to deepen the satisfaction with your own success. I put all these up here, but they're all over. And these were just some of the examples that I liked best, but there are 15 American states that have supported decision-making acts, and also the District of Columbia. And all of the service providers that assist with supported decision-making agreements, in those states have little videos of personal stories. Texas, the Arc of Texas is very big supporter, and helps people get the agreements written. And there's another one in Massachusetts that's very active, and their service provider that does it as well. And so they put their videos up. Okay, we have one more reason in Alaska, and I know you know this one, because we're all concerned about it. The situation with public guardianship in Alaska. And what we have is the Office of Public Advocacy that has responsibility for people who can't pay a private guardian and don't have a family guardian available to them. And there are currently about 1,600 wards statewide for the Office of Public Advocacy. And in April of 2023, the public guardian wrote a letter to the governor saying that they had a staff of only 17 public guardians, which meant that they had 97 to 100 plus wards. And I can tell you it's more like 100 plus. Some of the wards who have more experience have, 115. The public guardian informed the legislature and the governor that they could not take any new appointments for a year, that it wasn't safe, that people would be at risk, and that to meet their standards, they would need one guardian to 60 wards. Although I have to say the national recommendation is 1 to 40. And I do believe that the state of Washington has a code that says it has to be 1 to 25, I think. So there are some states that have codified a limit. But this isn't a new thing. 2017, it was 1 to 109 plus, and in 2018, it was about the same. So it's not going to change easily. And again, it's going to get a little better with funding and focus. But when I've spoken privately to public guardians and also done a kind of a straw poll in more than one of the trainings that I did in 2018, 2019, it looks like there are between 20 to 25% of the supervised wards in the public guardian's office that are not appropriate for full guardianship, that should be in a less restrictive tool under an order for something, maybe for a conservatorship, but that some people are not appropriate for court supervision at all, and should have their own legal authority with the support of powers of attorney, medical health care directives, and things like that. So that is the unofficial opinion of, I don't want to name names, but that's what I've been told when I've asked off the record. 20 to 25% of the wards on the OPA um, role for supervision shouldn't be there. So how can professionals help? I would say that there is a kind of a two-part best practices for SDMA writing. Now, before I go on, keep in mind that when I say this, there are people whose lives, again, are simple enough and their decision-making support is clear enough that they aren't going to need the kind of professional help to write all of these things. And for those people, there are simple guides that are available online, and they can use a simplified form so long as they get those signatures notarized and so on. If someone has in their life a supporter, or they also just decide they want to try to do it and manage to do it, they could fill out all of the lines on that SDMA and then take it to a notary and with their supporters and get it signed. This isn't the only way to do it. What I want to stress is that this is the best practices, and that this is the way that it should be done for someone who doesn't already have an understanding of what they want and who is going to help them do it. So the first part is a decision-making profile. And that's really something that has to be done by somebody who has training in social services. So it's talking about someone's goals, about their choices, who are their known supporters, and also who might be a supporter that they haven't thought of. It should include services that they use or that they could use. Maybe they're not utilizing the way to the degree or even at all that they could, and other options for them. Then it is about writing a profile. For example, it would just be a couple of pages describing where they live and whether they live alone or whether they have people that live with them. Are they roommates? Are they family? Um, they've worked in the past or they haven't. They have an interest in working. They want to go to do a program at UAA. They are interested in getting vocational training. Those kinds of things would be in that profile. And then the second part, once that profile is put together and any documents that are attached to it to add more information are appended, it would go to a legal services staff person to draft that legal document and get those signatures. They would also need to be have a meeting with the client, a legal services person would, and write the agreement and then advise people of the legal effects, like the description I gave about going to the DMV. The law says that if a decision is made using the support that is in the SDMA, that is described in the SDMA, that any decision made using that kind of support must be treated as though it were a decision made by the person who has the SDMA. Think about what that means for a second. If someone goes into the bank and the supporter is standing next to them, their brother, their parent, maybe their best friend, somebody they trust, and they make a decision to apply for a loan, and they have their SDMA there, and that loan officer tries to say that because they've asked questions or gotten more information from the supporter, that isn't really their application, the bank can't do that under the SDMA. That's the kind of thing that the SDMA protects. Now, if someone has a guardian or a conservator and they've signed the document, that doesn't take away their legal authority to make that decision as the final protector against the risk of financial crisis. So nothing in the SDMA changes a court order that says that a guardian is still the guardian. The conservator is still the one who has to make that financial decision. Profile will go to a legal services staff member because the legal document has to be written and they have to get the signatures from the guardian, if there is a guardian, the conservator, if there's a conservator, and all of the supporters to their declaration. And those signatures have to be notarized. So the legal services staff is going to meet with the client, write the agreement based on the profile of decision making. They'll advise people of the legal effects, and then they're going to formalize it under the statute. And that formalization is the signing and the witnessing and the notarization of all of the signatures. Now, the reason you have to have a legal services person for this part is because people need to understand what the legal effects are. And lawyers are probably the best people, or non-lawyer advocates are the best people to do that. Now, what we have for social service professionals is a guide, because you want to think about, oh God, I blew it again. So we have an SDMA guide for social service professionals. And the reason it's got to be social service professionals is because we need somebody who, this is just dumb. Sorry, Kara, poor gal. All right, let me see where I'm going with this. Okay. Now, when we talk about having a social service professional create a profile for decision making, we realized that we needed to create a guide, because we wanted to have the right kinds of professionals taking notes, writing up a person-directed plan for decision making, someone like a service navigator or a clinical social worker, a care coordinator, a case manager, or even a special education or IEP coordinator, school psychologist, court visitor. So we created a guide for that kind of professional group that has a role in helping people think about what their goals are and make a plan for how those goals get described to other people and how they become real in someone's lives. How do people get information about their choices for employment or for education or for where they live? And that clearly is this kind of group of people. So we worked with the Center for Human Development and got a Lend Fellow who was also a special education, started out as a teacher and is now a coordinator for a school. And he wrote, along with the council, a guide. And that guide, you saw the front page on the last slide. This is an example of one of the inside pages. And the whole thing is graphic like this. So it's easy to follow. And it's available at the Governor's Council in paper form. And they have a lot of them. So you should just, if you want to have them, go get some. And what I'd like to do now is just kind of walk through a little bit and tell you what's in it. And after you get off of this Zoom, go ahead and take a look. You'll see on page 4, there's just a process overview, how to be able to help someone choose the supports that they want, to talk about their supporters. What's the next step is crafting the document, making sure that you clarify who helps with what, and when they'll help and how they'll help and what will it look like in practice. And then that document gets, again, sent to a legal services provider to be reviewed and signed. The middle part looks a lot like this example on the page to the right of the outline. It's all about the areas of wanted support. So it goes from health and wellness and medical care to budgeting, bills, and banking. It's got friendship and dating and sexuality and community, home and home life. One section is education and training, another's legal questions. And then the last page is transportation and recreation and fun. And in it, each section has these same kind of dark blue circles that have subheadings. And then there are specific questions. If you look on the example, community, home, and home life, and clean and safe living conditions is in the middle blue bubble. And it talks about keeping my room or home clean, contacting my landlord for repairs, having a plan, and being prepared for emergencies. These all come from the various guides that are out nationally. The ACLU and the ASAN also have guides that are in plain language and for families and people who want supported decision-making agreements. The Lend Fellow took those documents and moved them into a professional perspective so that a professional using this guide would be able to steer the discussion to kind of check off all of these commonly discussed areas of decision making, just to be thorough. Then moving to page 11, there is a whole page that's just about supporters and offering options to someone about who their supporters are and who they might be. Family and friends, community, professionals. It also has a big box that says who cannot be supporters. And all of this comes from our Alaska statute. So you can rely on the information in this guide as you are helping people figure out what their decision-making profile looks like. The next section is discussion tips for professionals. And this comes from training that the Lend Fellow had in getting his degree for special education and talking about how to bring together IEP teams and partners around that table. So the section on page 12 and page 13 talks about how to educate supporters, what your professional role might look like or in practice as you're having discussions, the initial conversation, and then also tips for quality conversations and allowing people to share equally around the table. It's all part of this guide. And then the last part on page 14 is about crafting the document. And when we talk about the document, we're not talking about that final supported decision-making agreement. We're just talking about that profile, which for lots of you, you have so much experience writing a profile of someone's life, and renewing that profile and editing it, changing it. It's the similar kind of document. It's probably a lot shorter. And really, it's 1 to 2 pages, and it's about areas of wanted support, listing supporters, and then talking about specific decisions that supporters will help with, and then how each supporter would be helping within those decisions. And That goes together along with some other documents that you might need, and you send it off to the legal services provider, along probably with a release of information to make sure that you are um, not sharing confidential information without having authority from the person who wants the SDMA. Now, we talk about, I've always get asked about who's going to pay for this, and how it's going to take so much effort to get all this information together. And my comment is, well, we already do it. We do it in lots of different ways and places already, right? We do it, we have specific language describing roles in advanced healthcare directives, and people often already have those. If you can ask someone to bring them in, or you can find out whether they have one, that's a perfect thing to cut and paste, honestly, or um, make sure that they are consistent at least. But financial decisions that are already in trusts or are described in able accounts, or if someone has a shared account that requires two signatures, that's a good indication that there's a financial supporter out there. Or if they have accounts with special features like uh, the credit card that alerts somebody else when it's used, maybe above a certain amount, or a prepaid credit card, and someone is helping making sure that that gets recharged with resources. Um, Individualized plan for employment from DVR. They have to be about making sure that somebody is exercising informed choice with the support and assistance that's needed. It's very similar question to what you're asking about if someone wants support for employment. So finding out what their employment goal is and how that's being met and what kind of support they're getting is super important, and also maybe easier than finding out that information otherwise. You can attach some of these things too, also to the SDMA, and that can be part of the document that the lawyer creates. Informed consent for medical care is very much like the standard for language that you would put in for help with decision making in medical care. It's basically, what would a person need in order to make a good decision about their health? Um, Again, IEP programs for transition age youth, they are not just about education, I mean, about employment. They're about supported living. They're also have a part that's about transitions for community engagement, and what their goals are for their life for education. So this is a really good place to get information, and also a valuable part of the IEP document to attach to that SDMA. Again, person-centered planning and Medicaid services, you know more about that than I do, but I'm sure that that's a wealthy place of information for writing an SDMA. And actually, I think there's probably a fair amount of reporting information and data that's around Medicaid services that honestly could be just cut and pasted and put into that profile for decision making. And the representative payee contract, that's also sort of about limiting people, or limiting the payee to Social Security benefits. The type of language about what the payee will do and what they are not responsible for is similar to the kinds of things that might be part of a direction to people who are helping with banking. So the reason I do all that is because I want to point out that there are other places we already collect that information that we're talking about here. So it isn't as though you have to reinvent the wheel. As a practical matter, to write a profile in decision making, you can take information from other places and ask the person who wants the SDMA and their supporters, if they're part of the decision, um, what kind of information do they want to carry over from those other documents into the SDMA? Is this still true for you, that your decision making on employment has resulted in this kind of goal? Is this what you still want? Those kinds of things expedite the process. And there's also an SDMA guide for legal professionals that's less relevant for the people on this Zoom, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that it's out there, and that it's available through the American Bar Association. But right now, your best contact is the Disability Law Center, and here is the link to their information page on supported decision making. There are trained non-lawyer advocates. We're trying to get some more of those, and then paralegals could also do it. I think one of the paralegals at DLC is a notary, so it might be possible to make an appointment if you already have someone who is able to write their SDMA agreement without assistance from a lawyer or a non-lawyer advocate. Then it might be possible to make an appointment to get that thing notarized at the Disability Law Center. In other states, law students through legal clinics are writing SDMAs. Texas is a big one for using law students. But this guide is also online, as we said. So if you need help and you want to collaborate with somebody, these are some examples of people that I have trained already, and also people that I will be training in the next 4 or 5 months. So I want to make sure that you know that you can ask around. You know, the way Alaska functions. Sometimes it's pretty informal, but to find out if someone else has done it, or if they haven't good information, or if they've attended a training, to just get like a double check on something that you think is true. People to talk to, service provider agencies. We did a program, a pilot project with Hope, and they have some institutional knowledge. And we also did some with the ARC as well. I trained the staff at Frontier, probably in 2019. We're also doing trainings with the regional centers for independent living. Right now, there's a good resource in Kenai. I don't want to single her out, but it's true. She's excellent. And so you might give a call there and ask if there's anybody who could answer a few questions for you. We're training the ADRC and the DDRC staff. Disability Law Center is always a good resource. Even if they can't take on a case, they can give you professional assistance, and that's the thing to ask for. Governor's Council is always a good place because they're going to know who is currently got the room to help. And they also have a committee now, that work group on supported decision making and other alternatives to guardianship. IEP team or special education coordinator, if they don't know, it would be great to challenge them to find out, because it is part of their job to know, especially for transitional youth, what kinds of tools are appropriate and should be used for increasing independence. And we have already trained a SAGA and did a training with court visitors. That was a while ago. But the court visitors program through now the court system, it's actually through the state court administrator's office, has a really great couple of advocates in there for supported decision making and alternatives to guardianship. Lisa Warzonik is somebody I would be able to refer you to. She's just a wealth of information. And other care coordinators. I now have kind of just had discussions with 3 different care coordinators who are who I directed to the guide and gave a little bit of head start, and they are willing to start doing this with their clients. So it might be that you have a connection or could be somebody's connection for that face-to-face or personal kind of answers of questions you don't have. The last one is me. Um, I am making myself available through the council to help with people having kind of difficulty with starting after they have tried everything else is my request. um, because I'm doing it pretty much pro bono, and this is, my career. So what I'd like to do is have people try to use the online resources, use the websites and the trainings that exist, ask around, and if you absolutely can't find an answer or just want to get started and you don't feel secure doing it until you've talked to somebody, that you talk to me. Some other resources, obviously, we've got this guide, and here's the link. This is Alaska's agency guide for creating SDMAs. It is, I think, a really good document. I'm really proud of the Center for Human Development, and the Lend Fellows are amazing. Disability Law Center has an information page that is about kind of the nuts and bolts. It's a good thing to give to people as a way of referring them to the Disability Law Center. The ACLU guide, there are 2 of them, and they're both really good because they're plain language. They also have a good, strong graphic content, and they're good for families and for people who experience um, developmental disabilities to understand how to sort of discuss with other people what they want for their own decision making. More tools and resources online. National Support Center for Supported Decision Making is a really great resource. Um, so is the ASAN guide. It's another, especially the guide for families, which is the second one on these 2 links here. Again, really good, clear guides. And the AARP guide is good because they've got reference to materials that are about helping people with money. And it's specifically people who are older adults who are experiencing aging, and that it's likely to continue. So those are the specialized considerations that are related to people who are aging. So that is the end of this. First of all, I want to say thank you to each of you, and to the Department of Health and Social Services, especially Kara Livingston Thrasher. Um, Also for me, this is not just the work that I do, it's a passion, and I want to make sure that um, this really great tool gets used. And I want to help make it easy for professionals to do that. And from the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, we also want to thank the U.S. Administration for Community Living, um, and the Department of Health and Human Services for the grant. This work is supported by the Living Well grant, and of course also through um, the Department of Health and Social Services for Alaska. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing your questions when we are live.